Welcome to the Performance Enhancing Podcast. It's like steroids for your brain. A podcast for people that want the best info, but just don't have the time. Get your podcast fix with the Cliff Notes versions of your favorite podcasts. No fluff, just the actionable golden nuggets. Having this much knowledge at your fingertips should be downright illegal. So get ready for another dose of Performance Enhancing Podcast with Satori Prime. Here's your host, Ilan Ferdman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Performance Enhancing Podcast. Today is a special day on a lot of different levels. One, it's my birthday. Two, I'm sitting here really with the number one business podcaster, the guy that got me started in this, John Lee Dumas. Welcome, man.
I am just simply prepared to ignite. Let's rock and roll.
You know what? It's so funny. Every time I hear like Entrepreneur on Fire, do you read The Hunger Games at all?
I do. I just actually took a flight to Europe 2 weeks ago and I watched Catching Fire. It was amazing.
Yeah. So every time I see that, I'm like, he's the man on fire. She's the girl on fire. You're the man on
That's
fire.
girl on fire. Yeah.
So John, I want to start by asking you this because we obviously at Story Prime, we train entrepreneurs too, but I feel like people have this thing where they compare themselves to others, especially when they're starting out and they're like, oh, you know, John's doing, what are you doing now? Like 450,000 downloads, maybe even more a month, right?
Yeah, we're actually going to be breaking 600,000 downloads for May today, and it's May 24th.
So even for me, you know, I'm like looking at John and going, oh my God. Like, so I think so people get grounded. It's always important to kind of give them a sense of where we got started, quote unquote, and like all the abysmal mistakes that we made to get us to where we are. So if you could just share like one or two things that were, you know, massive failures on your way so that people get that you went through this journey too, that it's not just magic.
There was a lot of mistakes and a lot of failures along my journey. I mean, my 20s, I basically call the quitting years because all I did was quit. I mean, I started different jobs and quit. I started different career paths or even went to law school and I quit. I mean, really the only thing of substance that I did in my 20s was serve our country. I spent 4 years as an Army officer in the U.S. Army with a 13-month tour of duty in Iraq. But then from that point when I was when I got out, when my commitment with the Army ended, and I was 26 years old and I was starting my career at that point, the next 4 years in my 20s were just kind of one quitting after another. And to be honest with you, I don't look at the word as quitting as a bad thing anymore because I actually look at my time in the Army as giving me the courage to quit because you know, I saw a lot of things and I experienced a lot of experiences and it made me realize that I wasn't willing to settle. I wasn't willing to maintain a current job or career path that I just wasn't passionate about. And that was my 20s. I tried law school. I wasn't passionate about it. I wasn't going to spend another 2.5 years after one semester of realizing how unhappy and unfulfilled I was just to keep doing that. I wasn't going to stay at a job in corporate finance with John Hancock, despite financial success and, despite being promoted, even though I saw a career path lining up in front of me because I wasn't fulfilled there. So I quit that as well. And, those were a lot of things that I failed at because, they were failures as far as I never kind of kept going to fulfill what could have been potential. But at the same time, I'm glad that I released that because, it allowed me to keep swinging the bat and, and missing the ball over and over again. But finally, when I was 32 years old and, congratulations on your 33rd birthday today, when I hit 32 years old, that's finally when my bat really connected with a ball in both passion and enjoyment and dedication. And that was Entrepreneur on Fire. But even with Entrepreneur on Fire, I continue to fail. And, you talk about our huge download numbers. I started with 3 downloads day one. And just yesterday we had a 44,000 download day, but that didn't come overnight. That's a very slow progression. Like if you look at my download chart, it just goes up like this. Like it's, bouncing, but it's always going up. And that's what I think people that are starting businesses, whether they be blogs, podcasts, video, whatever that might be, you're not looking to hit that home run out of the gate. You're looking for a very slow, steady progression in a worthy ideal, which for me is now podcasting. So failure is something to be embraced. Quitting is something not to be afraid to do. I think it takes more courage to quit and to try something new than to maintain a current status quo.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about listening to your heart and intuition. And there's a question I want to ask you about that, because I know there's something pretty insane that you did when you first started. But to speak about, how you've gotten to, and by the way, congratulations on almost hitting 600,000. That is like,
thank you.
My brain can't wrap around that number. Put it that way.
We just crossed it today. So
Incredible.
we might actually get to 700,000 in the month of May if we keep having huge days.
So let me ask you this. So you've obviously had a ton of success in getting your podcast out there in a way that very few people have. What are some tips that you can give to people out there that are currently podcasting to help them with either their marketing side or their syndication side? Like, how have you built it to go out that big?
So I really think there are 3 super key factors. And these 3 factors are really what I've focused on and really maintain with Entrepreneur on Fire. And a lot of people get one of these 3 right. A lot of people get 2 of these 3 right, but very rarely are people getting all 3 of these right. And the third one, which is the one that I'll mention last, is actually the one that I see people lacking in the most. So, first and foremost, number 1 is value. You really want to be providing great value to the best of your ability with every single podcast. For me, that version of value at episode 10 is a lot different than it was at 600, and that's fine. Like, I wasn't able as an entrepreneur to give the kind of value then that I can now, and that's totally okay. But as a podcaster, as an entrepreneur, as a content provider, you need to be focused on providing the best value that you can at that stage in your career, and that's what I've always strived to do. Number 2, and this is really key, and this is why I think podcasting is an amazing medium, is make it free. You're not looking to monetize your audience right away or maybe ever. You're looking to grow an audience, looking to grow a massive audience. And that is by following number 1, providing insane value to the best of your abilities. And number 2, providing that value for free. That is so huge. And that's what's allowed me to grow a massive audience now where, we have over 7 million downloads of the podcast Entrepreneur on Fire since we launched. We're hopefully going to be cracking or at least be close to 700,000 downloads in the month of May. And that is going to be a huge month for us. We've grown an email list of over 13,000 subscribers, a Facebook following of over 14,000, Twitter followers of over 22,000. That's all been by me providing free content. That's incredibly valuable. If I started charging even a penny per podcast at the beginning, I never would have been able to build that audience. And it's that audience that's allowed me to monetize in a huge way. I mean, just last month, Entrepreneur on Fire grossed $232,000 in revenue. And that was when I launched a podcast back in September of 2012. People said, John, how are you going to monetize this? I said, I don't know. I just know that I want to grow an audience. And that was where my focus was. And my audience, told me ways to monetize as I got to the 1 year plus mark. And that's when things really started to get that snowball effect. And number 3, I don't want to forget about the most important thing that I believe most content providers miss the mark on, and why Entrepreneur on Fire is such a shining example of this. And that's frequency. That is consistent frequency. It's a 7-day-a-week podcast, 365 days a year. I don't miss a day. My audience knows rain, sleet, snow, or obviously I'm in San Diego, so it's always sun. Fire. Oh, yeah, here we are in San Diego. Yeah, Entrepreneur on Fire. I mean, I can see smoke on the horizon right now. I mean, literally from our wildfires. Rain, sleet, snow, fires, whatever that might be, they know they're going to wake up in the morning and there's going to be a fresh episode waiting for them. And maybe they feel like listening to an episode, or maybe they don't, but they know it's always going to be there for them. I just took a trip for 2 weeks to Europe. And when I got back, I knew that because I'd scheduled it out, that 14 episodes went live during those 2 weeks. I did not take a break from my audience. I kept that consistency there. So, make it insane value, make it free, and make it consistent. And if that's once a week, that's totally fine. It doesn't have to be daily, but just be consistent. If it's Wednesday mornings at 5 a.m., keep it Wednesday mornings.
Yeah, I agree. So you alluded to this. So you're one of the few people that even today is doing a 7-day-a-week podcast. And I heard on an interview you did previously where you said that you hired a mentor, you paid him really good money to help you with launch this podcast, and you were like, I'm going to do a 7-day-a-week podcast. And they were like, you're an idiot. No one's going to listen to a 7-day-a-week podcast. Don't bother. But you still chose to do a 7-day-a-week podcast. So what inside of you, and what was that process where you're like, I just paid this guy thousands of dollars to train me, and I'm going to do what I feel is right?
Great question. And to clarify, there was a male involved, and there also was a female. So my direct mentor was Jamie Tardy, the eventual millionaire. She was my one-on-one coach, who I hired at $1,000 a month for 3 months to train me on the ins and outs of podcasting and to help me network with the online world. And number two, I joined Cliff Ravenscraft's, the Podcast Answer Man's podcast mastermind, which is an unbelievable mastermind. He actually stopped doing the mastermind, which is a shame because it provided so much value. I got so much out of it. I was in there for a full year myself with 10 other podcast mastermind members because he breaks us up into teams. And it was amazing opportunity. And from both Jamie and Cliff, I got incredible amounts of valuable information that I never would have been able to come up with on my own because I was a newbie. I didn't really know what I was doing. But one piece of feedback I did get from both of them was, John, you have a lot of energy. We can see you got a lot of spunk. I know you want to do this, but a 7-day-a-week podcast, for all the reasons that you just mentioned, is not going to work. People aren't going to want to listen to a 7-day-a-week podcast. You're going to get burnt out after doing this for just a couple months. It's just going to be too crazy to do. And, just do a weekly show. And there's nothing wrong with a weekly show. And it was something that I did consider at first, but then I said, you know what? There's one thing that I know in these 32 years of my life. And that's that I'm always experiencing failures and struggles and disappointments when I don't follow my gut, when I don't follow my intuition. But on the flip side, when I do follow my gut, when I do follow the intuition, it doesn't always work out, but I just am always happy and satisfied knowing that deep down I did the right thing for me. And that was my calling. It was telling me, put those blinders on, John, take in all this great information that you're getting from these great mentors, but do the 7-day-a-week show. It's there. You want it as a consumer, because that's what I wanted when I was in the car running out a podcast. I wanted a 7-day-a-week show and it didn't exist. And there must be other people out there like you. And this day and age, your community is not just your town or your region, it's the world. Entrepreneur on Fire gets downloaded in over 145 countries every single day. So I knew that I could reach people in the world that felt the same way as me. I didn't know how many there were. Luckily, there ended up being quite a bit. And we were actually awarded Best in iTunes of 2013.
Amazing. I just want to point out to everyone listening that as an entrepreneur in whatever you do, whatever business, whatever you're passionate about, not even an entrepreneur, the ability to trust your gut and listen to it is so paramount in becoming a master. It is, and it, again, just to point out, John paid thousands of dollars to mentors who knew way better than him, and he still chose to follow his gut. I just really want to drive that home because I think it's really, really important. All right, so a couple of questions here in regards specifically to your podcast. So you've obviously been doing this very, very successfully, and I'm sure you've fallen on your face a few times, kind of like what we talked about earlier, but
every month,
yeah. What would you have done differently in regards to your podcast specifically? Knowing what you know today, what would you have done differently when you first started?
So I have a very distinct story on this question. And
we love stories.
It's actually, yeah, me too. And I actually call it my $100,000 mistake because that's what it was. And the reason why I call it a $100,000 mistake is because I had a very solid timeline. I had everything in place. My mentor and myself worked very hard. I did all the interviews. I got my platform ready. My website was set up, ready to go for an August 15th launch. Then I woke up August 15th, terrified. I was paralyzed with fear. And why was I paralyzed with fear? Well, it's called the imposter syndrome. Everybody deals with it. Every person that's ever walked this earth deals with the imposter syndrome. That question of like, why me? That voice that's questioning yourself and challenging yourself, and all of these different emotions that are boiling up. And what it really came down to is that all this time, I had not yet failed, and I couldn't be considered a failure and publicly humiliate myself because I hadn't launched yet. So people could say as much as they wanted about how a 7-day-a-week show probably wouldn't work and how I was going to potentially fall on my face. But until I launched, nobody really knew. And I loved that because I loved the fact that, I'm kind of safe, in this pre-launch bubble, so to speak. And that was really important to me. And I was holding on to that because I was scared. And so August 15th came and I was, looking to pop that bubble, announce myself to the world. And then what was that potentially doing? It was potentially exposing me to fail, for the show to fall flat on its face. We've all seen those huge Hollywood blockbuster movies that have flopped. Those songs that come out with all of this expectations and they flop. We've seen flops all over the place. Sports athletes, you name it. It's just this world is made up of it. And I didn't want to be the next flop. And I didn't want to be a flop in the podcasting space because this was my first kind of hoorah into the entrepreneurial online world. And I really wanted to make a big splash. So I woke up terrified. And what did I do? I came up with BS excuses to myself. I came up with BS excuses to my mentor, Jamie Tardy, to my mastermind members. And I bought my own excuses. I was so convincing, apparently, that they bought my excuses, which are all BS. So I delayed 15 days. September 1st came, the same fear assailed me. I delayed 15 more. And then finally 15 more. And so now here it is in late September, and my new launch date's October 1st. And then finally my mentor, Jamie Tardy, calls me up and she says, John, I see what you're doing here. I bought your BS for a while, but I'm not going to put up with it anymore. You either launch today, September 22nd, or I'm firing you. And the only thing that was more scary to me than actually launching was losing my mentor. So September 22nd became the day that Entrepreneur on Fire launched. Now, as soon as it launched, success assailed it from all avenues. People loved the format. They loved the flow. They loved the consistency. I was getting thousands of downloads. I was asked to speak at a major conference. All of this happened because I launched, and none of it would have happened if I kept delaying and never ended up launching. And why I call it my $100,000 mistake, I'm kind of getting to that kind of wrap up of the story, is that 13 months after launch, in October of 2013, we had our first $100,000 month. And it was a huge month. We broke 6 figures for a month. It was obviously amazing for many reasons, but all I looked back and was thinking was that, that those 5 weeks, that 1 month plus that I delayed my launch, all that did was push this $100,000 month 1 month into the future. So instead of my first $100,000 month being in September, it would have instead of it being in September, it ended up being in October because of my delay, because everything was just on a timeline and I was just producing and growing the audience until it was at that right point. So that's my biggest failure. That's my biggest regret. And that's when I mentor people who are preparing to launch their podcast. And I mentor 4 people on a monthly basis. That's my biggest thing. I see the imposter syndrome come up in every single one of them without fail. And I've now mentored over 40 podcasters over the last 10 months. And the imposter syndrome comes up every single time. And I consider it my job to break them out of that so they don't make the same mistake and commit the same failure that I did. And I'm happy to say I definitely make it happen.
Well, when you know that the lines you were giving were BS, you're much better at reading it in others. It's interesting.
I can see right through it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did an interview with an amazing woman, a positive psychologist called Stella Grisant, and we had this conversation back and forth about how when you become entrepreneur and there's this moment where you're standing like right on the cliff's edge, and the only thing to do is jump. And you don't know what is going to happen on the way down, but it's an entrepreneur's job to basically figure out how to fly on the way down. And it's that moment that's so terrifying that most people run the other way, which is why I believe there's really only 1% of people who are, uber successful, because those are the ones willing to jump and had no idea how to fly when they jumped.
I love that. That's huge.
You can steal it.
Yes, expect it on an upcoming episode.
All right. So a couple other things I want to ask you. One, you've obviously in the process have been able to interview hundreds of masters. And I'm always amazed by, like, you're a master in podcasting, right? Which is why I wanted you on this show. You've interviewed masters all over. Studying for masters and seeing that they all have a certain quality or kind of like a certain, I don't want to say programming or habits. What have you seen in interviewing all these people that you've kind of taken on as habits and patterns that you've seen collectively from all these successful people that's made a really profound difference in your life or your business?
So there's actually a book that I just read that really sums this up incredibly well that I recommend anybody reading. And it truly is one of the most important things and reasons for success that I see the over 600 now successful and inspiring entrepreneurs. They all have this one thing. And I keep saying that word one because that's exactly what it is. And the book is called The One Thing by Gary Keller. And that is unbelievably overlooked. Gone are the days of being that Renaissance man where you're kind of good at a lot of different things, because then you just blend in with everybody else who are kind of good at all of those different things. Yeah. You need to be that one person. You need to be that person that is dominating that one thing, no matter what it is. For me, it was a 7-day-a-week podcast. And, it was pretty easy for me to dominate that niche because nobody was down there in that niche. I kept niching down. I didn't just do a podcast or then a business podcast or then an interview business podcast or then an interview business podcast that was once a week. I kept drilling down until I was the only person that was doing a 7-day-a-week business podcast, interviewing inspiring and successful entrepreneurs. So guess what? I dominated that niche. I was number one in that niche, number one of one. But you know what? It still worked. And that's what I see so many successful entrepreneurs are doing. They're choosing their one thing, and they're not afraid to niche down into that one thing until maybe it's just them, or maybe it's only 100 people, whatever that might be. But maybe in that one thing with 100 other people, they're the only person that's solely focusing on that, nothing else. Nothing else at all. So they're strictly focusing on that. So they are dominating that niche. Every entrepreneur makes the same mistake when they first start. Every single entrepreneur. They say, you know what? I want to have this broad audience. I want everybody to be able to resonate with me. I don't want to leave people out. And when you try to resonate with everybody, you truly resonate with nobody. So find your passion and really take that passion and drill it down into just that one thing that you can dominate, and then just focus on dominating that one thing, and you'll be shocked. If that's doing Google Hangouts, interview style with people that hike, the Alaskan Alps, if there's even such a thing. Like that,
we made it up.
We made it up. But then guess what? Then there's a movie called Gold Rush that comes out. And, they're like, wow, we need to find that person that knows everything about the Alaskan Alps, because we are going to be looking for gold in the Alaskan Alps. And next thing you know, you are the executive producer on a TV show. I mean, that's just something I completely made up off the top of my head, but it happens every single day.
Yeah. I call it, on our show, I call it being world class at something, where it's like, you like you said, you niche down, but you dedicate your life to just mastering it. And if I asked you, John, today, as good as you are at podcasting, are you still a student?
Always a student. Always
a student, right? It's like, it's amazing. All the masters, they're just never ending junkies for education. Okay. So here's a question I ask everyone towards the end of the podcast. And this doesn't have to necessarily do with business. It can be with anything in your life. But there's that ultimate cliche that we always say to each other. And this is one of those things that I kind of look at specifically at my birthday, which is, if I knew then what I know now. So you've had a, lifetime of experiences, let's say. So what's something that you wish you knew, say 10, 15 years ago, that you were very grounded in today that's made a profound difference?
The one thing would truly be that there are so few people that have the courage to take decisive action in this world, that those few people that do are the ones that time and time again are finding great success. And so, especially when we start off in this entrepreneurial world, it's very daunting because you see a lot of people having a lot of success and you're like, how could I ever bridge that chasm? How could I ever be at that level? And the reality is those people just made a decision at some point in their lives. They were in that exact same situation that you are now. They made a decision to take decisive action and to become a world master at one thing. And whether that be writing, whether that be blogging, whether that be hiking in the Ozark Mountains, they decided to become a master at one thing. And those are the people that are now incredibly successful. So, have the courage to take that decisive action every single day with consistency. It goes back to that most important thing of those three things. Number one, was to provide incredible value. Number two, for free. But number three, you have to be persistent. You have to be consistent. You have to have that frequency that just keeps going strong. And persistence will always, always win.
Yeah, 100%. And it's amazing how the universe or God or whatever the heck you want to call it will throw you literally every obstacle in the way to make you turn around. And it's only those that actually stay the course and, like you said, have that frequency that ever see the other side of this.
And here's a huge mindset shift. Embrace those obstacles when you encounter them, because you should know, and if you embrace this one reality, know that every single person is encountering these same obstacles, is encountering these same fears. And if you take the mindset of embracing those obstacles and fears, because that is having 99.9% of your competition quit, go away, go home, stop. And so if those obstacles and fears weren't there, then you would never be successful anyways, because everybody would be able to just do whatever they wanted to do and there'd be nothing holding them back. So be excited when you hit this obstacle. Say, you know what? That obstacle that I just hit sucked, but it sucked so bad that 99 out of 100 people that were doing the exact same thing that I was doing decided to quit today, and I didn't.
Exactly. That's exactly my point of jumping off that damn cliff. So John, just so people know, obviously I've shared your Entrepreneur on Fire a bunch of times on our podcast here, but where can they find you? Where can get in touch with you?
eofire.com is where all the magic happens. And, I love podcasting, so I would be remiss not to mention that every single week we do a free live webinar about podcasting at podcastersparadise.com.
I'll leave all the links, guys, at satoriprime.com/podcasts. John, thanks for making my birthday a little extra special this year. It was an
33.
The big 33. It was an absolute pleasure to have you here, and I'm sure our paths will cross very, very soon. Thank you, my friend.
Oh yeah, P90X3.
P90X. I'm actually going to do it right now.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. Bye, buddy.
Thank you for joining us on this week's Performance Enhancing Podcast. We've taken this pep talk and created a custom action guide so you know exactly what action steps to take now to grow your business. Just head over to satoriprime.com/podcast and download it for free. Also, please leave a comment and rate this podcast on iTunes. It'll help us get the word out. Thanks for listening. Now, go and implement. We'll see you next time.